All right, let's dive in. We hear a lot about political plans, right? But how often do we actually get to see them compared, side by side with real-world actions? Well, today, we're digging into a source document that does exactly that. It takes the Project 2025 blueprint and holds it right up against reported presidential actions from 2025 to see how well they match up.
And that brings us to the core question this source document is trying to answer. When you have a really detailed plan for governing and then a series of executive actions are taken, how closely do those actions actually follow the script? That's what this whole analysis is about.
So, here's our roadmap. First, we'll get clear on what the blueprint and the actions actually are. Then, we'll jump into the 5 key areas the source compares. After that, we'll see how it calculates the final score, and we'll wrap up with the report's big conclusion.
Okay, so first things first, before we can start talking about alignment, we've got to be super clear on what 2 things are being compared here.
So, on one side of the scale, you've got the blueprint, and we're talking about Project 2025. The report we're looking at describes it as this huge, comprehensive policy guide from the Heritage Foundation, basically a governing plan ready to roll.
And then, on the other side, you have the 2025 actions. Now, according to the source, this isn't just everything that happened. It's a specific set of reported executive orders and administrative moves coming out of the White House in 2025.
And this is really the key to the whole thing. The source document isn't here to judge the policies, good or bad. Think of it more like a forensic analysis. Its only job is to measure exactly how much the reported actions actually overlap with that original plan.
All right, now we get to the heart of it. The report dives deep into 5 specific areas, 5 domains they call them, and this is where we get to see the direct side-by-side comparisons.
First up, the civil service. The blueprint called for something called Schedule F. The idea was to reclassify tens of thousands of federal employees into at-will positions. And at-will is just what it sounds like. They could be dismissed without the usual job protections. So what did the report find? Well, it points to a 2025 executive order that brought back this exact plan, with some reports suggesting it could impact as many as 50,000 jobs.
So, based on that pretty direct one-to-one match, the source document gives this domain a whopping 95% alignment score. It calls that a near-perfect match between the plan and the reported action.
All right, domain number 2, agency loyalty. The goal in Project 2025 was pretty straightforward. Make sure officials are on board with the White House's agenda and remove anyone who isn't. The source then connects that idea to reported actions, like the removal of the CDC director or the sidelining of some career lawyers over at the Department of Justice.
And for this one, the report calculates a 90% alignment score. Still, a very high level of follow-through, according to their analysis.
Okay, number 3 is all about justice and the rule of law. And it kind of builds on that last point. The blueprint pushed for something called the unitary executive theory. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying the president has total control over the executive branch and can direct the Department of Justice's priorities. The source links this to reports about shakeups among senior DOJ lawyers, moves it says pushed aside career expertise.
The score here, 80%. And while that's a bit lower than the first 2, the source still calls it a substantial alignment with the blueprint's goals.
On to number 4, education and culture. The directive in Project 2025 was huge. It was talking about a massive restructuring or even getting rid of the Department of Education entirely. And the analysis? It points directly to reports of a 2025 executive order that aimed to do exactly that. So that comparison gets an 85% alignment score. And the report makes an interesting point here. It says this score reflects a high alignment in intent and those first crucial steps, even if the whole department wasn't, dismantled overnight.
And that brings us to the 5th and final domain, which is a little different. It's this big picture theme of presidential power. The blueprint's goal was clear: expand presidential control over, well, everything, all the executive and independent agencies. And the source argues that all those actions we just talked about, Schedule F, the personnel changes, the DOJ pressure, they all add up. They're all part of this broader push to assert that power. And for this big picture theme, the analysis gives it the same score, 85%, marking another area of really high alignment.
Okay, so we've walked through the scores for all 5 domains. Now for the big reveal. How does the source add all this up to get to its final conclusion?
And this chart just lays it all out for us, side by side. You can see civil service right at the top with 95%, and the others all clustering in that 80 to 90% range.
It's a really clear snapshot before we get to that final number.
And when the source crunches all those numbers, this is where it lands. The final overall alignment score is 87%. That's the report's central finding, a single number meant to quantify the overlap between the plan and the actions.
So 87%, that's a pretty high number. But what does the report itself say it all means? Let's look at their final conclusion.
So what's the takeaway here? The report concludes that the heaviest hitters in the Project 2025 blueprint, they weren't just ideas on a page. They found strong to very strong echoes in the actual administrative actions reported in 2025. The analysis is basically saying there's a clear line you can draw from the written plan to how things played out.
And to really hammer the point home, the document ends with this quote. It says, "The present trajectory reflects a high level of alignment with Project 2025's core vision." In the report's own words, that's the ultimate conclusion.
So this analysis from the source gives us a really clear answer on the what, the degree of alignment. But, it also leaves us with some even bigger questions. It makes you think about the why behind it all, and of course, what could come next. Thanks for digging into this with me.